Sputnik 1 – Dawn of the Space Age. On October 4th, 1957, Sputnik 1, a 184-pound, 23-inch in diameter aluminum sphere with 4 thin antennas, began its elliptical orbit around the Earth. Though only the size of a beach ball, the emergence of Sputnik struck fear and awe into the hearts of people all around the globe. The Soviets' launch of Sputnik 1 marked a pivotal turning point in history because its unprecedented rise as the world's first artificial satellite pressured the United States to make multiple revolutionary decisions to regain technological ground in the Cold War, which included the creation of the Advanced Research Projects Agency, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and the passing of the National Defense Education Act. This chain reaction ignited the space race, a series of spacecraft launches between the Soviets and Americans that led both countries to make numerous technological advances, which paved the way for more innovations that have shaped the world we live in today. Sputnik's roots trace back to the beginning of the Cold War, a decades-long struggle for global supremacy which was fought between the two global superpowers following World War II, the capitalism and democracy favoring United States and Communist Soviet Union. It took place between 1947 and 1991 and was typically fought through a show of technological superiority and political or military propaganda. As Cold War pressure continued to mount, on July 29, 1955, U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower announced that the United States would be developing an artificial satellite during the International Geophysical Year. This was a global, collaborative study of biological and chemical processes that contributed to Earth's astronomical environment and was set to take place between July 1957 and December 1958. 4 days after the U.S. announcement, the Soviets announced that they also intended to launch a satellite during the IGY. As the following years passed, the United States made their plans and progress concerning their satellite development very public, while the Soviets operated in secrecy, giving them an upper hand. Initially, Soviet chief designer Sergei P. Korolev had plans to construct a 2,926-pound satellite dubbed Object D, which contained various instruments that each gathered data on the Earth's upper atmospheric environment. Construction of Object D was set to be completed between 1957 and 1958. However, upon realizing that the complexity of the satellite meant that it would only be completed by April 1958, Korolev and his colleagues were forced to temporarily set aside the development of Object D and instead work on a new, simpler satellite to launch before the beginning of the IGY, which was July 1, 1957. OKB-1, Korolev's Soviet-designed bureau, proposed the construction of the simplest satellite to the government, dubbing it Protyeshi Sputnik. Their plan was to design a simple satellite containing minimal scientific equipment that weighed around 220 pounds and have it ready to go by May 1957. The creation and launch of the satellite was approved, and after extensive testing, Sputnik 1 was ready to go. On October 4th, 1957, Sputnik 1 was launched into orbit. It was a crucial turning point in history, marking the beginning of an era of technological innovation and shocking the world. The news of Sputnik immediately marked a turning point in the Cold War, as it provided the Soviets with an enormous boost in worldwide respect and influence. Additionally, it was a tremendous blow to the Americans' morale, which had been at an all-time high following their victory in World War II. The Soviet success gave the American public the impression that their technological capabilities had fallen behind those of the Soviets, leading to widespread public anxiety.
It's frightening. We should find out what they're doing that we're not doing. And we should do something about it very quickly.
In order to regain the United States' perceived lost technological ground, Dwight D. Eisenhower, the U.S. president at the time, was obliged to act to quell the United States' growing sense of uneasiness.
Some facts about our present security posture. It is one of great strength, but by no means should this assurance satisfy any of us.
On February 7, 1958, just 4 months after the launch of Sputnik, Eisenhower responded by establishing ARPA, or the Advanced Research Projects Agency. After its creation, its motto and purpose was primarily to make pivotal investments in breakthrough technologies for national security, a manifestation of the American fear that the Soviets could use their technological advantage for war. On July 29, 1958, Eisenhower proceeded to sign the National Aeronautics and Space Act of 1958 into law, creating NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The newly formed government space agency absorbed the assets and personnel of the NACA, the United States' former aeronautics organization. Immediately, NASA was tasked with the mission to get a satellite into space. Then, in response to the public impression that the America's STEM education was subpar compared to that of the Soviets, Eisenhower signed the National Defense Education Act on September 2, 1958.
Scientific advisors place this problem above all other immediate tasks of producing missiles, of developing new techniques in the armed services. We need science.
This was a successful billion-dollar legislation that primarily targeted education in mathematics and science. The NDEA took effect immediately, providing around $1 billion for scholarships and student loans, targeting those who displayed greater capacity towards mathematics, engineering, and science. This chain reaction, fueled by Sputnik's success and the two nations' Cold War rivalry, ignited the space race. A series of spacecraft launches between the Soviets and Americans in which either country tried to prove themselves superior to the other by launching a satellite or spacecraft more technologically advanced than the previous. On November 3, 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik 2, carrying the first ever dog in space, a stray named Laika. Then, after the failed Vanguard TV-3 launchpad explosion on December 6, 1957, the United States finally found success with their first successful satellite mission, Explorer 1. Eventually, after many additional spacecraft launches throughout the 1960s, the United States won the space race by landing the first humans on the moon with the Apollo 11 mission on July 20, 1969.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
This was a monumental victory to the Americans, restoring their confidence and traction in the Cold War. The U.S. victory also inspired masses of Americans to pursue college education alongside the lasting financial support provided by the National Defense Education Act. Sputnik's legacy extends far beyond the space race. A group of scientists at Johns Hopkins University observed that the frequency of Sputnik 1's emitted radio signal increased as the satellite approached and decreased as it got farther. In 1958, ARPA, the agency created by Eisenhower in response to Sputnik 1, used this idea to develop Transit, the world's first global satellite navigation system. Throughout the 1960s, it was continuously developed and paved the way towards the creation of the GPS used worldwide today. In 1969, ARPA developed the conceptual basis for the ARPANET, the world's first prototype of the Internet. It was created with the intent to share information over great distances without the use of device-to-device connections. This way, information could still be gathered even after a nuclear attack on an important location.
Trying to figure out how to share resources. If you had a simulation program running on one machine and somebody wrote one on another, how could they work together? It was an opportunity for the future. To sort of break new ground.
Through the 1970s and 80s, the development of rockets began to slow down. The Sputnik shock that brought the space race to life also led to a decline in the popularity of space exploration after the space race came to a conclusion. However, following the 1990s, space exploration began to regain traction as major achievements such as the Hubble Space Telescope, International Space Station, and the creation of the Space Shuttle each carved their places into history. The development of spacecraft has continued to increase in popularity throughout the 21st century, and NASA has announced plans to construct a moon base on the moon with the Artemis missions. In summary, the launch of Sputnik 1 in 1957 marked a crucial turning point in history, as the shock it inflicted on the US led to the creation of NASA, ARPA, and the passing of the National Defense Education Act, igniting the space race, in which those exact organizations helped pioneer the next generation of technology for humans. The launch of Sputnik revolutionized technology used around the globe, transformed the American education system through the National Defense Education Act, and dawned the space age, paving the way for major space missions such as the ISS and Artemis that will continue to propel and test the technological limits of mankind. Without this simple satellite, the world we live in today would not be the same.